Hello, everyone. Firstly, thank you all so much for coming and for celebrating Black History Month with us today. I'm Dan. I'm the chair of the LGBTQ+ network at Schroders, and we're very honoured to be a sponsor of this event with the support of our colleagues in the Black Professional Network. Thank you, everyone, firstly, for your involvement in the event, in the organisation, to our speakers, to our panellists, who you'll hear more about shortly. I have been briefly told that we are technically not allowed drinks in here, so if you're very careful to not spill it. Thank you very much.
Hi guys, thanks all for coming and thanks Dan. So my name's Perry Joseph and I'm a portfolio manager at Cazenove Capital. So we're the wealth management arm of Schroders. Very nice to welcome you all here to our venue. And just to sort of outline a little bit what the Black Professional Network is about. It's about representation. So we try to help Schroders meet their diversity targets. We also try to help our members and be a voice for our members as well. We team up with a lot of the resource groups across Schroders, and we're very proud to be teaming up with these guys today, putting on this event. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce us to our first speaker, which is Marcia.
Thanks, guys. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black and Queer. We've always been here. Thank you to Schroders for hosting us at this evening, and it's a very fitting venue for this evening's discussion. This event is run by Interinvest and sponsored by the Diversity Project. For those who are not familiar, Interinvest is made up of LGBT+ people and allies that work in the investment industry and who care about the LGBT experience in investment. The diversity of the investment peers also forms part of the LGBT+ workstream of the Diversity Project. Interinvest's aims and objectives include providing a welcoming space for members to discuss LGBT issues in the context of the industry, sharing best practice with the industry, and enabling firm-to-firm collaboration to provide support to in-house LGBT networks. Here we go. Also to engage allies and promote allyship, drawing upon their intersectional networks with similar experiences, like today. And speaking of intersectionality, this event is during Black History Month. And with recent changes in management at the firm, this is a timely overview of LGBTQ+ rights and freedoms across the Commonwealth and how we got here, and an inspirational discourse on how we can make progress together to inspire action. I'd now like to introduce you to Darren Johnson, Executive Director and Global COO at Impacts Asset Management and co-founder of Talk About Black, to speak further and far more eloquently than I could ever do on this.
Thank you, everyone. So I have a confession. I've not had the opportunity to speak or to be involved with Interinvest, and it's a privilege for me to do so now, this evening. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. I just want to say a few words to basically kind of frame where we are today. So we are in the digital information and knowledge sharing age, a world where intangible value has taken over from tangible value. The economy is changing. We are all changing with globalization and the pivot away from just shareholder returns to focusing on the impacts we as people and our companies are having on humans, fellow people, and the environment. Human capital and innovation is replacing natural resources as a basis for growth. The threat to growth comes from a shortage of highly skilled talent, the lack of inclusion, and people's sense of belonging, not only in their workplaces, but in society as well. In a situation of resource scarcity, we need to maximize the productivity of the resources we do have, which is us today. So the question is, why can't we take advantage of the talent we have in our society today? What are the constraints that are over us that we can't really find this talent, which is everywhere? Well, there's many reasons, but there's some powerful ones. There's powerful constraints, such as biases, race, religion, sexual orientation, disabilities, and many others. And if you're an individual with intersectionality across all of that, it's a very difficult situation potentially to overcome those heavy constraints. However, we are lucky enough to have organisations like Interinvest, Diversity Project, Talk About Black, and many others who are focused on educating employers and employees about the constraints in our society and in organisations. Because as we know, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. So just to talk about a few of the organisations, a bit more. Diversity Project, in which I'm very lucky and privileged, along with Matt, to be a director of, or sit on the board of the CIC of Diversity Project. And the Diversity Project recognises the constraints that there are in the investment and savings industry that stops different types of talent taking opportunity within the investment management and savings industry. We also have Talk About Black. Again, I sit on the board of Talk About Black, and that organisation really tries to help black and minorities get into asset management. And how it talks about that is really, it talks about the flow of water, and it talks about hosepipe, and it says there are 4 kinks in this hosepipe. And the 4 kinks it talks about is pipeline, entry, progression, and taboo. So I'll start with the pipeline. So with the pipeline, we have a schools program which helps to allows disadvantaged kids of any race, creed, or background to be given a qualification. It's normally 16 to 18-year-olds to allow them and equip them to be able to get into our industry. And then when we talk about entry, we have another program called the Skills Workshop, which allows, which basically gives young people the skills, or people with experience as well, the skills to progress or indeed enter our industry. And then we have progressions. Now we have these people, we've got them in. How do they progress across our industry? Because one thing we noticed was that in terms of black, there isn't much representation at the sort of client-facing roles, so the sales and client service, as well as the portfolio management roles, as well as leadership. So how do we get people in and how do we progress them? And with that, we have a number of mentoring schemes to help. So we have In Circle, we have City Hive, and we also have a Black Leaders program, which is supported by CEOs across our industry. And then the last topic is really the taboo of talking about black or talking about being different. And we hold a number of talks about this. In fact, we've got one on the 31st of October. All of you are free to register for that, where we have Eric Collins as the keynote speaker for that. So really important things that we do there, and that's really the 4 kinks. And we feel that if we can unkink that hosepipe, talent can flow. And that's basically the ethos of Talk About Black. So I have to finish by talking about allyship. And without allyship, none of this would be possible. And the most important thing of being an ally is listening. And this is deep listening, not just hearing, but listening to people's circumstances, how people perceive what's going on, and trying to do something about it. So speaking up when you have an opportunity to do that, to support people. You also need to understand that the people most impacted by an issue are the people that are most perceptive to that issue. So you can't just assume that, because you can't see it or it's not your lived experience, that these people are not feeling that way. So it's really important for us to do something about it. And the last point I'll say is really, I want us to listen today. I can't wait for the panel. I'm going to really enjoy that. But we need to try and move beyond the conversation. Right? We need to take action, move beyond this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Can you hear me? You can. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I know it's a Monday evening, dark and wet, but, we do appreciate your time and your support. So I am Chris Barrow. I've been in the financial services industry for about 20 years. Yes, Marcia, I do look good for that. And it's Black History Month, so I can say the melanin is popping today. So there you go. So thank you, Shoulders, for this amazing overhead lighting, which I'm sure Mariah Carey will be very jealous of. Apart from that, I've been the co-chair of my previous company's LGBT networks. I'm a role model for LGBT Great, and I'm part of the racial equity workstream for Interinvest. who are the people that organised this for you today. So I'd like to give a big thank you for those people that work behind those boundaries, being Tristan, Dion, Lydia and Paul. So thank you very much for your time here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our first panellist, who is a lecturer from King's College London. So please join me in welcoming on stage Dr. Jonathan Ward.
Okay, I'm just going to double check that the slides are working. Cool. Hi everyone. Thank you very much to Intro Invest for inviting me to be here. So as Chris mentioned, I'm Dr. Jonathan Ward, and I'm a lecturer in Race and Diversity Studies at King's College London. So as part of this event, so I was asked to kind of talk about the kind of state of play as it stands for kind of queer people across the Commonwealth. And so with my kind of lecturer hat on, I wanted to kind of contextualize some of that discussion for you folks. So it shouldn't be kind of overlong, but hopefully you find it kind of interesting. Okay. So in terms of thinking about colonialism, so this map kind of gives you a sense of just the sheer expanse of the British Empire, right? So you can see the UK really, really small at the top in red, and then a sense of just how kind of how expansive, I guess, the kind of colonial reach of the British Empire was. And obviously you can kind of see up to Canada, across the Caribbean, across Africa, India, and then down to Australia, right? So a huge, huge reach. So one thing that I kind of just wanted to kind of draw your attention to in terms of how we might think critically about colonialism and kind of as a practice what it meant. So obviously colonialism is the conquest of lands, but it's more kind of complex than that. And there is the kind of importation of customs. And as you might notice from the map of Africa, there are lots of place names that I hope aren't familiar to you, because that's not what the map of Africa looks like right now. Right, and so that's a kind of example of just the kind of colonialist mindset, right? So where British colonial explorers kind of went to various lands, and today I'm going to be focusing on Africa, just for the sake of time. And one of the things that they kind of did there, I think is kind of indicative of the sense of kind of ego of the kind of colonialist imaginary, is just to rename places, right, as they made sense to people. And so as an example, so you can see, I hope you can still hear me with the roving mic. So just down here at the bottom, so you've got Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia. So that's not what these places are called now. Right, so Northern Rhodesia gained independence as Zambia in 1964. And I want you folks to pay attention to these dates as well, just because we often talk about colonialism as something that happened way back when, and we don't need to think about it anymore. And actually, it's incredibly recent history. And some people in this room might even have been alive at this moment in time. So Southern Rhodesia gained independence as Zimbabwe in 1980. Bechuanaland gained independence as Botswana in 1966. And Swaziland gained independence in 1968, but it was only renamed Eswatini, which is the kind of local dialect, in 2018. Right? So when we think about colonialism, I want us to be thinking about how it's still incredibly kind of present for us now, not only in kind of what happened in the kind of decolonizing of the British Empire, but also thinking about the legacies of colonialism as well. So as well as kind of importing particular kind of customs, languages, one of the kind of key tools of colonialism, and one of the things that was imported to Africa, was Christianity. And so this was kind of used as a way of positioning Britain as superior, because to be Christian was to be better than anyone who was non-Christian. And part of the kind of colonialist behavior was to import Christianity, so kind of natives of various African countries would need to convert, right? And this is kind of one of the tools of colonialism. And so I want us to kind of bear this in mind when we often kind of think about, or are encouraged to think about, former Commonwealth countries and current Commonwealth countries as being these sort of hotbeds of kind of homophobia, transphobia. And so colonialism really, I think, is the backdrop to this, right? So I want us to be thinking about this context. So in the 2013 report, Making Love a Crime, Criminalization of Same-Sex Conduct in Sub-Saharan Africa, Amnesty International found that in 38 countries, consensual same-sex conduct continues to be criminalized, and in 4 areas, the death penalty is used for such conduct. So many states as well have no legal provisions recognizing trans individuals, and some use criminal penalties against same-sex behavior, cross-dressing, loitering, or public nuisance to target trans people. And I'm bringing this in just because, again, there's not a great deal of kind of research or kind of statistics that kind of focus on the forms of transphobia experienced across the African continent. But I just want us to kind of be aware that it's still happening, right? So and also it's often sort of under the proxy of homophobia, because trans people are often not seen as trans, and their kind of behavior, their lifestyles are seen as kind of coming under the umbrella of same-sex behavior. So in addition to this, there's no legislation in Africa covering transphobic motivation in hate crime and hate speech. And when the violence is committed by state actors, trans individuals have little to no recourse to reparations. So although there are no figures available for the rates of transphobic murders across the African continent as a whole, evidence from various countries shows these numbers to be disproportionately incredibly high for trans people. And so again, so this is often sort of what dominates the sort of rhetoric when we talk about kind of homophobia that exists in Africa, right? We're just presented with Africa incredibly homophobic, and that's kind of where the conversation often kind of remains. And so I'm wanting to just kind of, again, sort of complicate that a little bit. And so this is from the South African Commission for Gender Equality. And so they note that the eradication of explicitly discriminatory legislative provisions from South Africa's law books has not eradicated societal prejudices that entrench and encourage discriminatory practice and action in employment, access to health, criminal justice, and safety and security. And so I'm not going to read the kind of entire extract here, but you can read it. And so what I'm kind of wanting to draw our attention to is we often look at laws as a proxy for understanding levels of homophobia. And if we kind of look a bit closer than Africa, so if we take the UK as an example, right, so we have kind of legislation preventing kind of homophobic and transphobic hate crime. It's not criminalized to be a queer person. Also, there are kind of legal recognitions for trans people, but yet the kind of rates of homophobic and transphobic hate crime in the UK are kind of climbing at incredible rates. And so again, so we might want to kind of think beyond just looking at kind of laws and legal provisions as a way of understanding rates of homophobia and transphobia. So in responses to Freedom of Information requests from every police force in the UK that were obtained by Vice World News, the new data shows police received 26,824 reports of hate crimes based on sexual orientation in 2021 to 22, and this is compared to 10,003 in 2016 to 17. So that's a 168% increase. The most recent reporting year also saw a 32% increase compared to the previous year, which is the biggest yearly rise ever recorded. For reports of transphobic hate crimes, there were 1,292 reports recorded in 2016 to 17 and 4,399 in 2021 to 22. So this was a 59% increase compared to 2020 to 21, which is also the largest increase ever recorded. And Gallup's 2021 hate crime report showed that only 1 in 8 queer victims of hate crime in the UK reported what happened to them. And so again, kind of putting that in sort of comparison to kind of these sort of statistics that we often see kind of emanating around Africa, particularly African homophobia and transphobia, just thinking that, again, we might want to look beyond kind of the figures of kind of crimes and particularly crime reporting. Again, kind of one of the things that I'm wanting to think sort of critically about here is the kind of legacies of colonialism. So even in their report, so Amnesty International's report about kind of same-sex behavior and how it's kind of seen and punished by the law, they use the term sub-Saharan Africa, which is itself a colonialist remnant from when European colonialists wanted to distinguish countries in the north, so Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, from the rest of Africa. So there's a kind of division here between black and Arab, right? Arab was recognized as being close enough to white to not be seen as bad, right? So again, so even in their work to kind of try and undo some of this kind of homophobic kind of understanding of Africa, Amnesty International themselves are kind of perpetuating some of this colonialist language. So again, we might want to sort of just think beyond that. So today, again, my talk is fairly brief, but I'm also wanting to challenge this binary that we often kind of see where Africa is homophobia and the West or the global North or Britain is kind of the presence of liberation, is seen as kind of tolerance, and is also seen as where kind of homosexuality and trans people exist, where that happens. And actually kind of the reason why we see this kind of homophobia and transphobia happening across Africa and actually much of the Commonwealth is because kind of, again, with the sort of importation of sort of belief systems with colonialism itself was incredibly reliant on very rigid understandings and perceptions of gender and sexuality, and it's these that are the kind of legacy that kind of was left behind when the British Empire kind of were eradicated through kind of countries gaining independence, although obviously there's still some presence with the Commonwealth. Okay, so in terms of thinking about kind of acts of decolonization, so this was the Rhodes Must Fall kind of decolonial kind of fight in Cape Town, South Africa in 2015. And so this is about Cecil Rhodes and the kind of remaining statues of him, right, celebrating his legacy. So Rhodes was a British politician in Southern Africa who served as Prime Minister of the Cape Colony from 1890 to 1896. So he might be slightly familiar to you from my first slide because Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia were named after him, right? So again, this kind of incorporation, this importation of kind of celebration of sort of the Eurocentric as opposed to the African. So you might also be familiar with his name because of the prestigious International Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford University, which is the oldest graduate scholarship in the world. And he also founded the De Beers Company in 1888, which is the world's largest producer and distributor of diamonds, and in 2020 had a revenue of $3.4 billion US. So again, we can kind of see these kind of remnants, right, these legacies. And so I'm wanting to draw your attention to kind of Rhodes Must Fall because as useful as it is to kind of be aware of this kind of legacies of colonialism, also there is much kind of action and political kind of urgency around acts of decolonization. So you see this in 2015 in Cape Town, South Africa, and then this kind of moved globally to the UK Rhodes Must Fall campaign in Oxford. Again, Rhodes kind of the Rhodes Scholarship is housed by Oxford University. So this gives you an example of how this movement is kind of transnational and how we might think about decoloniality in relation to history and memorialization and different forms of memorialization such as individual, collective, institutional, state, and global. And so again, kind of just wanting to sort of problematize the kind of legacies of colonialism and the colonialist mindset. So the Kenyan writer Binyavanga Wainaina wrote this kind of very famous essay called How to Write About Africa, right? And here he's kind of parodying this sort of exoticization that happens around Africa, right? So he says, in your text, treat Africa as if it were one country. It's hot and dusty with rolling grasslands and huge herds of animals and tall, thin people who are starving, right? And again, I won't read all of it, but he goes on to kind of point out these sort of tropes that we see sort of existing around Africa. And so I'm wanting here to draw a kind of connection between, again, the sort of Amnesty International graphic that we saw, right? So this very kind of monolithic idea of Africa, again, often talked about as though it's one country. In fact, it's an incredibly diverse continent, right, made up of numerous countries. And so again, so we kind of see these kind of acts of decolonization happening in kind of various pockets. So we can think about the Rhodes Must Fall campaign in South Africa, and then kind of as it moves sort of globally and to Oxford. And then we can kind of think about the legacies of that, you know, around kind of the increasing awareness of Black Lives Matter and the toppling of the Edward Colston statue in Bristol, for example. And this, again, when we're thinking about sort of action, how to be allies, this, I think, is an example of how we might, as another Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, encourages us to decolonize our minds. And just to kind of finish off, so again, sort of with my lecturer hat on, so this essay, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, written by Eve Tuck and Kei Wen Yang, has been incredibly kind of widely disseminated. And here they talk about decolonization as not being a metaphor. So by that, they mean that it's not a swappable term for other processes. And I think that that's useful here because it makes us think about the ways that in order to truly decolonize, there are specific processes of occupation and appropriation which need to be undone. Right, so there are kind of mental processes, but there are also kind of more tangible actions that I think are really important. So I would also argue that we can go further than this, and as Swati Arora argues, occupation and appropriation are not a singular event. They are ongoing, and abolition cannot be limited to one singular event, but requires a continuous commitment, right? So again, think about being allies, right? So how we might continually kind of act to seek out kind of equity and liberation for everyone, particularly if we're kind of fighting for folks that don't share the same kind of identity characteristics as us. So I just want to finish off. So this was taken from Bel Ribeiro Addy's first speech in the House of Commons. And here she kind of draws our attention to kind of one kind of tangible act that we might think about when we're thinking about acts of decolonization. Cool.
We also see countries in Africa like Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda amongst the fastest growing economies in the world. Countries that Britain deliberately underdeveloped, stole resources for, and brutally enslaved its people. Madam Deputy Speaker, were you aware that in the mid to late 1700s, over 50 members of this House represented slave plantations? Members of Parliament, just like how this House treats people that look just like me.
So now I'm going to hand over to someone that doesn't need much notice. I think the community know him as, let me read this correctly, the angelic troublemaker incarnate. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Busy Alimi, who is the founder and director of the Busy Alimi Foundation. And once you get back outside to the reception, you'll see on the desk some QR codes that support the foundation. So please scan that when you're out having a mingle. Please welcome Busy to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Oh, thank you very much. I thought I was, for once, thinking, am I in the right place? Yeah, I'm not going to talk much because I think we have a panel discussion, and I think that that's much more powerful than me just trying to make a speech. And thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan, for your presentation, because I don't think I would have done a better justice to that. But I think what is very important for us to think about today, it's something that I would love to share with you. I just got back from Accra last Monday, and I was there to attend a UN meeting on business and human rights in Africa. It sounds very grandeur. It was indeed very grandeur because there was no business in the room, but it was full of civil societies trying to learn how to speak and convince corporates to do better. I think 5 years or 6 years ago, I realized that companies are not set up to do good. If they do, it's because they are nice. It's not because it's part of their trading ethics. And so I stopped getting mad at companies for not being good, because they're set up to make profit. But at the end of the day, we can talk about profit within the concept of humanity. And I think that that is what is extremely important. And just going by what you said, so we had this session on the African Free Trade Agreement. Do you know, actually, that it's easier to fly out of Côte d'Ivoire to Paris so that you can fly to Lagos? It's cheaper, is better, and is safer than for you to actually fly from Côte d'Ivoire to Lagos. That will take you about 1 hour, 30 minutes. It's easier for you to fly from Lomé to Paris, and then from Paris to Lagos. That will take you about 8 hours. It's cheaper than for you to fly from Lomé to Lagos that will take you 1 hour. The conversation about decolonization goes beyond reparation. And it is very important for us to understand this. Do you also know that the partition of Africa has not ended? So, not a single English-speaking airline will fly in a French-speaking country on the continent of Africa. And not a single French-speaking airline will fly within the territory of an English-speaking country on the continent of Africa, unless that country is a big economy like Nigeria or South Africa. So you can't, for any reason, get a direct flight from here to Cote d'Ivoire on British Airways. No, you can get it on Air France. So you fly to Paris, you fly to Cote d'Ivoire, but you can't get a direct flight. And you cannot get a direct flight from any of French-speaking countries, so let's say France, to any English-speaking African countries. And these things are very subtle, but they're very powerful. Ethiopian Airline is one of the biggest airlines on the continent of Africa and is democratizing the process of flying. And sometimes we don't know how powerful flying is. That I can take my goods from Lagos and can go to Lome for 1 hour in a day and trade and make money and fly back. What you do here. I remember when I used to teach at Humboldt University in Berlin. I would fly out, I'd take the 7 a.m. flight from Heathrow to Berlin. I'll teach my classes and I'll take the 6 a.m. flight back to London. Everything less than £100. You can't do that on the continent of Africa. So when we talk about all of these things, I think sometimes we bog down with the big grammar about, oh, let's do this, let's do that. But there are those tiny little things that are redefining access to wealth, access to relationship, access to partnership, and access to learning that is depriving an average African the opportunity to relate, interact, and create their own wealth. And wealth is important because we're in a company that is about wealth management. And we know that wealth is power. When I have money, I control my own fate. And I can invest in my community. I can invest in my people. I'm one of the people that are a little bit conscious about returning stolen goods. They were never borrowed. They were never a gift. They were stolen. But I'm one of those people that are very careful about those things. And the reason why I'm very careful is that they get burnt in the villages that you return them to because of colonial mentalities, like Fela would say. And so when we have this conversation tonight, these are some of the things I hope that can go beyond the big headlines. And let's go into the meat and tear things apart. And I just hope that the meat will be fleshy enough and tasty enough for us to be able to swallow them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bissy. I think it's time for us to have our panel session. So Bissy and John, please join me on stage.
Do we sit here?
Where would you like to sit? Great stuff. So let's start off with a question for you both. So, why is it important for communities of colour, as well as all queer people, to connect to this history? I might give that to you first, Bissy.
I mean, one of the ways that you can take the pride of people away from them is to take their history away from them. And history is very, very important. So as a little boy, my father will always tell us that we are, for no reason, he would say, you're Nubian. He would say that without meaning. Just say, don't forget you're Nubian. And as a little boy, I didn't understand what it means by being Nubian. So I started digging around and I realized that actually, originally, I'm from South Sudan. And we migrated to Nigeria and We settled in the southwest of Nigeria, and now we're Yorubas. If I'd not known that, I would always assume that I am Yoruba. And I have to dig around for where my name comes from. My surname is a Muslim name. It's not a Yoruba name. And it's about knowing this history has really, kind of helped me to reconnect with where I come from. And that is the power of history. And it's sad, in schools in this country, you don't teach kids about Black history. And it's about the shame of the empire. The empire doesn't want people to know what it has done. And so it has removed it from the consciousness of the people. And so we have been able to create a new beginning, a beginning that is built around the empire where the sun never sets. And so that informs every discourse that we have about where we are, forgetting that there was a history before slavery. But the history we're made to understand is a history of slavery, and thanks to films like Woman King and the rest that are telling us that, before we became enslaved people, we had an empire of our own. And some of us are even evil, which we need to know. And you can't take that away from us.
Yeah. Well done. John, what's your connection to the history? I'm sure it's not just down to you being a lecturer. Where does your passion come from?
Yeah, I think kind of just to echo what Bissy said, I think knowledge is power, right? And kind of taking away that knowledge, that kind of history, is a way of disempowering people. I think that the more we know, the more we understand ourselves and our connections to other people. Like, I think that history is really messy, and that messiness is good to know, right? So as Bissy said, thinking about kind of histories of African empires, which also were not just great shining emblems, right? Were also super problematic. But again, kind of having a kind of more complex relationship to that history, I think, is always going to be useful. The more we understand our history, I think the more we understand our present moment, the more we understand the directions that we could go, right? It opens possibilities. One thing that I remember in 2020 getting really frustrated with was lots of non-Black people being like, how has this happened? I'm like, pay attention to history, right? This did not appear out of nowhere, right? The kind of dehumanization of Black people, the kind of positioning of Blackness as somehow threatening, always something other, right? There's, centuries of that happening, right? And so again, it helps you to understand where we are. And I think, again, for me, it's really exciting to think about, if you know where we've been, you can know possibilities of where we can go. And I think that's exciting. And it's messy as well, and there's joyfulness in that messiness.
Yeah, I totally condone what you're saying. But there are many kind of former and current British Commonwealth countries that still have laws that are criminalising kind of LGBT+, whether it's their participation in it or the societal things. So how do we think about the duty of care and the protection of LGBTQ people in these countries, including the UK? I'll go back to you, John.
Yeah, I think so I guess I kind of gestured towards in my talk that I think it's obviously kind of really important for us to be aware of the ways in which people experience oppression, whether that's homophobia, transphobia, or kind of other oppressions which also often intersect. But I think kind of the question of how we have a duty of care to folks in the Commonwealth, I kind of wonder who's the we there, right? What is our position to kind of say that you need to do this? I think kind of where my sort of politics lie are more about us taking ownership of the legacies that we left behind. And again, that's kind of why sort of wanting to push against this idea that Africa is this hotbed of homophobia and we should kind of go in and kind of, we should change that. So we created that. And again, that messy history, right? Because also that was not just enforced on African folks, right? Lots of people benefited from their kind of actions and their kind of interactions with colonialist figures, with the kind of colonial regime, right? And again, that messiness is useful to know. But I think, for me, the seeking of kind of the equity of everyone and liberation for all is obviously what we should be fighting for. But I think sometimes the terms in which we kind of fight for that are suspect. And again, that goes back to history, right? And if we have a more kind of complex engagement with history and we understand some of that messiness, then it can stop us from repeating kind of this sort of paternalistic relationships and behaviors that we kind of see before.
Perfect. And Bissy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually like that question around who are the we. And I've worked in international development all my life, and I know that international development is fraud anyway. But that's a conversation for another day. Sorry, I'm the angelic troublemaker. You'll have to forgive me for some things that I said. But I can put it into perspective for you. Like I said, I worked in international development for 20 years. When the UK gives money to Nigeria, gives grant to Nigeria, most of the leading implementers of those projects will have to be British. That pay tax, yeah. And the British government define their salary out of the money that they've given to the country that is receiving the grant. And that money will have to be based on the exchange rate set by the giver of the money. They also set the exchange rate for which you collect the money. So you can see all those trends going on. And so by the time the money gets to you, it has no value, but they take it away anyway. And so you're left with nothing apart from the fact that they then come and tell you how to be gay within a society that they do not understand. And so there's a Western definition of homosexuality that then puts you in a position to question, am I gay enough or I'm not gay? Am I practicing this gay the way it should be practiced because these people are telling me this is how to be, but I don't really think this is how my people are? So this concept of we is a very problematic one. But I think there's a room at the table for everybody. And everybody has something to offer. But what is missing in that discourse is humility. And it goes back to what you say, the acceptance of the fact that we are the problem, right? So it is not the village people where I come from in Nigeria or the people in Lagos who wanted to stone me to death. It's not so much their problem. It's about a structure and a system that we're not seeing. And it was very interesting in that Tom Daly's documentary, Illegal to Be Me, when he was having the conversation with that lady from Jamaica. And she was, because we have this perception that, Jamaican people are very homophobic. And she was trying to break it down for Tom Daly. And she did it in a way that even I was sitting out and I was like, I never thought of this before. Because she said, male rape, trigger warning, male rape is what the colonialists use to subdue the men of the plantation and take away their pride from them. So they sodomize those men over and over and over again. And what happened, and it happened in the Congo during the war, is that if you sexually abuse the women, the men will come for you. But if you sexually abuse the men, you've destroyed the system of the society because you've taken the dignity of those men away. And once you take the dignity of the men away, you've taken the dignity of the village away. So what they did with the men on the plantation in Jamaica was to continuously sexually abuse them. So now, in the mindset of an average Jamaican that has passed the history from generation to generation, is that sodomy is evil. So an average Jamaican will attack you aggressively because you're reminding them of what they've done to their forefathers. And we can simplify that by saying, Jamaica is a very homophobic place. And we can get away with it because it's a very reductive argument to have. Or we can look at, wait a minute, why is Jamaica a very homophobic place? And until we get to the root, to that core, to start unpacking those things, we're never going to get there. And it's not just only Jamaica. So this whole idea of people who wants to help but don't understand what they're helping at. And till today, we still not had any apology from the UK government on homophobia. UK is a country with the least investment on LGBT advocacy on the continent of Africa. America is one of the biggest. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, are one of the highest investors in LGBT rights. They didn't even do any bad things, but those guys, I don't know why, they have this guilty conscience. And the people that did all the job, they don't even care. You know what I mean? So it's not just about apology, it's about being consciously investing in grassroots movements in a way that is empowering to them, not in a way that is glorifying your, savior ego.
So you've talked about a lot of societal issues here. So what part do you think organisations have in tackling this kind of society issue, especially those with a large global footprint? To you, John.
I think it kind of goes back to what Bissy was just saying about like the importance of grassroots organising, right? Like, and I think this is true of kind of allyship more generally. That I think we often see kind of acts of kind of social good or purported social good or kind of acts of allyship are actually performative, right? And so actually kind of to think if you're genuinely invested, pun intended, in kind of working towards the kind of equity of queer people in Africa, let's say, then talk to kind of African activists and ask them what they want, right? And I can't remember who it was, but someone mentioned earlier the importance of listening when you're an ally, right? And so I think to decenter yourself, I think that's one of the kind of cornerstones to me about being an ally, right? Like it's taking action, but it's not centering yourself. So it's thinking, okay, what do we have here, right? We have money, right? We can, but in the decentering of ourselves, we can think not just what do we want to do with this money, but let's talk to people on the ground from these communities, ask them how best that money, actually not ask them, give it to them and they can kind of spend that as they will, right? And again, like I think that, that decentering of kind of, well, my expectation is that we should do X, Y, Z. Actually, no, like I'm outside of that and that's okay, right? And again, we can kind of sit in that discomfort of like, actually like, if I kind of raise my voice too loud or kind of insert myself into this, I might be perpetuating kind of history, right, and perpetuating particular problems. So yeah, talking to kind of grassroots activist organizations, I think, is always the way forward because people within particular communities will always know what best that community needs. And also there will be times when it's uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, they'll be like, we don't want your money because we know where it comes from. Or actually kind of, we don't want your money because you're requesting to be credited or, whatever kind of strings might exist there. But yeah, I think kind of, I like the idea of, kind of particular countries that have sort of no skin in the game, right? Like didn't do anything bad, but just like, actually we should do some good, right? So copy that model.
Yeah, okay, that's great. As a black gay man, I will admit that my black history knowledge isn't amazing. There's a lot more that I could learn and do. How do you think we should spread the queer black history message? Because obviously in the UK, it's not taught in schools. So what avenues or opportunities do we have to spread this awareness, standardise it, make it known, Bissy?
Let's start by thinking Black History starts on the 1st of October and ends on the 31st of October. That would be a nice place to start. And stop making October Black History Month because Black history is, even which black are we talking about, right? Because I was never black until I came to this country. So which black exactly are we talking about? Is it black British, black American, black Africans, black Asian? I don't even know which black we're talking about. So it's massive. So black history is not just 31 days. It's more than that, and it's more complex than that. And I think that, the work that you're doing about, and I know that there's so many organizations. 2 days ago, I was at a panel with Stop Racism, and they're doing a lot of work in going into schools and having conversation. But I still think that we still need to get out there and make sure that we fight tooth and nail to decolonize our curriculum in this country. I think that's the best place to start. I still cannot believe that I knew about Nightingale, before I knew about Mary Seckle. I mean, really, how many of you have heard of that name before here? You know Nightingale? And you know Mary Seckle. How many of you know Mary Seckle here? I mean, look at that.
Yep.
Black History Month. And the thing that this woman did, she did not have the sponsorship of the state. She did not have any support. She took her own savings and went to the Crimean War to cater for the soldiers of this country. Whereas Florence Nightingale has the state, a white nurse, has the state backing to go to the Crimea War and do what she had to do. And she's the one we're singing praises of. I'm not saying we shouldn't sing her praises, but the woman who felt deep in her heart, a black woman, at that time, who felt deep in her heart that she needed to do something and pack all her savings and went to the war front to take care of the soldiers that were fighting for this country, was never remembered until we fought tooth and nail to have a miniature statue in front of St. George's, St. Thomas's. And we can talk about Windrush. I don't know, I'm not sure whether we're ready for that.
I don't think we have time for that.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot in Black history, but I'm going to round up with two things. I was still talking about that event I was, and it had Lady Danbury from Bridgerton, and she was speaking, and she said something that was very fascinating, and that thing that happened today. She said, "Do you know why there will never be a Black Prime Minister from the Labour Party?" He said, because every Black person within the Labour Party is seen as a victim that needs to be rescued. And so for as long as Black people are a victim in the Labour Party, they will never attain to power. But she now said, do you know why it's easy for a Black or brown person to be a prime minister in the Conservative Party? Because it's very easy to conform. Because as a Black person, you are seen as a perpetrator. So for that reason, you are trained to be worse than the people that oppress you. And for as long as you can be worse than the people that oppress you, you will have access to power. So there is this, and there is this middle. The Black person who is real, the Black person who is authentic, and the Black person who is unapologetic is a Black person that will never have access to power in this country because it's a threat and a reminder of the history of this country. And I'm going to end with this. Give money to activists. It's very important. We're talking to investors now, right? You people, you have money. But honestly, jokes apart.
They're workers as well, like corporate workers.
Exactly. I mean, do you know, let me put it into perspective for you. Do you know how much £50 would do for an organization in a country like Nigeria? Because for every £1 you will give, I need to pitch my organization. So for every £1 you will give to us tonight, the right-wing evangelical movement that are pushing homophobia on the continent of Africa will give £5. This is not me making things up. This is a statistic that is out there. For every £1 you give to fight, to support LGBT activism on the continent of Africa, the right-wing evangelical movement, whether it's in the UK or is in America, will give £5. Look at that. So when we ask you to give money, we're not begging you. We're telling you that people's lives are on the line for every penny you give. And that is why it is important. And it is important that also you give your time. Because there's a lot that you can share with someone in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, in Togo, in Uganda, about your skills that will transform their lives for the rest of for eternity. Because I want, and I look forward to a time where the bougie homosexuals will sit around the table in Lagos, drinking wine, while Nigerian politicians will stand up to them and say, give us money, and we will say, okay, if you don't give us gay marriage, we're not going to give you money. So when are you giving us gay marriage? Oh, we'll give you gay marriage next week. Okay, tick, or we'll give you money. Because money is power. And until we have it, we will continue to scream and shout, nothing is going to change. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very passionate, very insightful. Last question, because we are running out of time, to you, John.
You don't make me follow that? That was amazing.
You can close with like a really general, nice question. So why do you think allyship is important?
I think, generally because if you're an ally in some way, you hold privilege. So use that. Often, when we think about groups of people that are allies, they're often, not always, but often also the majority. And so that potential kind of solidarity will always kind of achieve more than kind of oppressed groups only kind of fighting for, struggling for themselves. I mean, aside from the obvious, it's the right thing to do as well, to be an ally. I also think that this idea of kind of thinking about like the privilege that I hold, right, like as a cis man, like as a British person in this country, like the idea that kind of to make things more equitable for refugees or for women or for trans people, that somehow I lose power, I think is nonsense. And like the world in which, or a world in which everyone has kind of equity and there is liberation, I think that's a better place for everyone. And so, yeah, I mean, hopefully everyone is in agreement that we should all be allies, but yeah, I mean, that to me is kind of the root of it.
Well, guys, we could literally talk for hours. You've got so much information that we could literally go on for days for. But I'm going to throw it out there to the audience for a bit of a Q&A session. Okay.
Oh, okay. You have one line. What does?
So we have a microphone.
I'll repeat.
Question online for you.
Following his earlier comment, what does the good investment in grassroots equality work look like in practice? So they're asking, what does it look like in practice?
Oh, okay. So let me give you an example. So we run a program in Nigeria called the Rainbow Academy, and the whole idea behind this is to recruit 20 gay men every year. 20 LGBTQI+ every year, and train them on personal development, because we know that is something that's been taken away from them because of their sexuality. And then do professional development, how to communicate, how to give talk, and all of those things. And the first cohort, we realized that that's not enough. So this year, we had the training again for different 20 people. And we invested very tiny small amount of money, $1,000. The money was given to us by Gilead Sciences. So capitalists do good things sometimes. Well, I'm HIV positive, so I take their drugs. It's give and take. But we invested $1,000 in 5 projects. One of them being a young gay man who is into, he runs a small blood bank in the capital of Nigeria. And we helped him to develop a business plan, give him some money. Now, he's gone a little bit up in terms of his business. He's recruited 2 other LGBT person to work for him that he's paying salary to. Now, that is what I call investment. Because if we can scale that up in the next 5 years, that guy will be making enough money to not just mentor other people that want to do the same businesses that he's doing, but be able to invest back into the community. And that is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm tired of begging people in London and New York for money. Sometimes it's very derogatory that I have to come and say, please give us money. If we create wealth on the continent of Africa, we have enough foot soldiers that can champion and invest their money in LGBT rights, in the same thing in gender equality rights. We've created this codependency nature that all of us have become so relaxed, right? We don't do anything with our money. We think we can take it out. And that is what that investment means to me. We need to wake up that sleeping giant of investing, not just in activists or activism, but in individuals in the communities that are showing potentials, and see those startups grow and encourage them to reinvest in the community.
One more from online, if I may.
Sure.
So this person's saying, what can I do as an employee or a multinational firm to be an ally to the cause for queer Black experience? By the way, loving the event, so thank you very much for it.
Is it for me as well? Yeah, I don't want to speak to allyship,
Okay.
but I don't like that word.
Okay. What would you like to call it?
Co-destructors.
Okay.
The system is so convenient for allies that you sip champagne and say, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry about what you're going through. No, it doesn't work like that. I want somebody who is going to stand by my side, who's going to hold my hand, and who is going to pull down the status of oppression. That is what if we want change to happen, whether for Black people, whether for on gender discourse, whether on the discourse of sexual orientation or either gender identity. We don't want people who sit on comfortable brown sofas, sipping champagne and saying, I'm shouting for you, go there. No, we want foot soldiers that are going to stand with us, using the armor of their privilege, because it's not going to be easy. So you need the armor of your privilege and fight. I don't like to use that word, but we fight. Allyship is very subtle. It's very pretentious. It's very bougie. Yeah.
I didn't make that word up, it was already around. just letting people know. Do we have anyone in the room that would like to ask a question? Lady at the back there.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. My name is Roy Vanderen. I think what we all have in common here is that we are in favor of LGBT rights, we are against homophobia, we are against racism. The real problem is not regarding the people in this room, but regarding the people who are not in this room and who are outside and decided not to be here. If I talk to people around me and they're not homophobic, they're not racist, but sometimes they ask me the uncomfortable question, Roy, let all your gay friends in Africa look at the Western world, what we do and what we have achieved. Let them mirror our society and the way that we organize things here in the West. And if they do what we do, they will also create equality for the LGBTQ community in Africa. That approach, that answer doesn't sound good for me. But it's really hard to come up with a sensible response. So what do you recommend me to respond to those friends?
Politely.
Okay, politely. I mean, so I think I would initially kind of take on that characterization as they should just look at us and we live in this idyll of kind of queer liberation, because that is not the case. So I think some inwards looking and introspection would be useful for those folks. And I think this idea of the West containing models that should be used by others, that's the blueprint of colonialism. So again, tell them to look at history, pay attention. Do they really want to be replicating that? And then if they do want to be replicating that, then there are some avenues that, again, I won't go into, but I think some more active kind of response from you would be useful.
Thank you. I think the lady at the back had a question.
Hi, I think this is fantastic. This is the first one I've ever been to. I just wanted to know, do you think our community, as in Black people, do enough? We've seen the progression of like the LGBTQ plus community transform over the last few years, and then we as Black people, we're still struggling over trying to find equality, abolish racism. Do you feel like we even champion you? Do you have to jump over to like the LGBTQ bandwagon to kind of get traction, or do you even see that? Do you as a Black LGBTQ plus person see that you're even being heard in the community? Are we doing enough? Is there enough of a bridge for our communities that we're supporting each other?
No.
Next question.
That's a very easy answer that I can give you, no. But again, life is not very easy. Life is complicated. It's very, very complicated. I do have a difficult conversation with my mom, who still wouldn't call my husband say, how's your friend? So I say, if you still calling my friend, I'm not going to pick your call again. And it's a very difficult thing for her to accept. And there was one that I was talking to an elderly woman here in London, and she asked about my wife. And I said, oh, she's fine. And I felt so ashamed of myself. The fact that I had to go back into the closet. Because I came back and the closet was scared because of, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here at all. But it's difficult. It's a very difficult conversation to be having with people. But we need to start. And I think what is happening is that, and don't get me wrong, the LGBT space is not even safe for us as Black people. Because there is that assumption that, oh, we leave Blackness and move to queerness. No, there is no space there. So we are left to create an alternative universe, a metaverse, where we exist as brothers and sisters and whatever it is we call ourselves within that Blackness outside of this too. And sometimes it can be very, very lonely. Very, very lonely. So it's not so much about, and I like your question, but I'm going to throw it back to you. Now that you know, what are you going to do starting from tonight? How are you going to have those very difficult conversations with your friends that are not going to be pretentious? Because we need to have that conversation. And it needs to start from co-destructors like you. Because there are places that I will not be able to come to speak because I'm not straight. But you have the straight privilege. Sister, use it. Thank you.
Okay, I know we had a few more questions in the room, but we really don't have any time. So I think what would be good is while we're having a glass of wine or a beer outside, you nab these two and make them work for their money. And leading on to that, I am now going to hand over. First of all, give the panellists a maiden round. So, yeah, echoes the sentiments. Thank you so much for the information and insight. It's passionate. It's just so insightful and motivating for me as well. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Matt Cameron, who is the Managing Director of LGBT Great. So please, Matt, take the podium.
Good evening, everybody. How are we doing? It's good to see you. Yes, so as Chris mentioned, my name's Matt Cameron, and I'm the founder and global MD of an organisation called LGBT Great. But I'm actually here to talk to you in my capacity as a board member of the Diversity Project tonight, just to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing in collaboration with organisations like Interinvest, like Talk About Black, and also the organisation that I lead as well. I really hate that picture. Let's go on to the next slide. So essentially, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a tool that we're developing at the moment. And what I hope to do today is to connect about some of the amazing things that we found out tonight. And certainly there's been a lot of learns for me. I didn't know that Africa was such a big and vast place, 54 countries, 9 million people. That was certainly an eye-opener for me. And along with all of the other points that you've made around sort of stories and the power of money in driving positive change. And we as the investment industry have a double responsibility, not just about sort of creating great environments for LGBT people, but of course, how we put that money to work through our ESG strategies. The biggest question of our industry at the moment. But I want to take just a quick few moments just to highlight some of the data points to you around the lived experience of being Black and queer. And the data points really do sort of speak for themselves. But it's a fact that if you're Black and if you're queer, LGBT+, you're going to suffer from more barriers, more social isolation. You're going to have a higher probability of suffering from poor mental health. And you're going to have fewer safe spaces. So we know that when we look at this through an intersectional lens, not just through sexual orientation or gender identity and race and ethnicity, the barriers are far more severe. And I think the data points are really, really telling. Now, we at the Diversity Project are committed to working with our 100 member firms to try and link diversity inclusion data to results within our organisations. And I would put it to you all today that without the diversity and the inclusion data, business leaders and organisations are quite simply unable to see what the real issues are. So we, as the troublemakers, we all have a responsibility to make sure that our organisation is doing what it can around the collection of diversity and inclusion data. Now, just to sort of give you a bit of context, the Diversity Project has 3 broad goals. I won't go through all of them, or goals connected to 3 areas of diversity, which you can see here. Race and ethnicity is a huge focus for the Diversity Project, and it works with lots of organisations, including Talk About Black and others, to empower and support Black and other sort of racial minorities to get ahead within the industry. But what we're really focused on now is trying to understand across our membership base, what is our progress towards these goals? And again, without the diversity data and without the numbers, we're unable to tell exactly where we are, and we're really just punting in the dark. So what we decided to do is really think about a way in which we can provide firms with an opportunity to actually report back every year on their progress against these goals. And what we're aiming to do is to really break down the goals into sort of smaller milestones in which in 5 years' time we actually stand a chance of hitting the goals. So what we're aiming and what we're doing now in the middle of doing is launching a tool called the Diversity Project Goals and Progress Tool. And I'm also the co-leader of the Diversity Metrics workstream on the Diversity Project as well. So we spent a long time workshopping with all the different work streams on the Diversity Project to try and understand what is it that we could ask about, what is it that firms could report on to fully understand where they are against the progress towards the goals. And what we're going to be doing later on this year, and please put it in your diary, the 28th of November, I think I've got that right, is the Diversity Project's annual event, Impact Through Inclusion, sponsored and held at Aviva Investors. And we're going to be providing a first insight and reporting back at an aggregate level, what 2/3 of the Diversity Project members are doing towards the goals. So it's going to be looking at how are they impacting gender, race and ethnicity, and so social mobility within their organisations. Now, it's worth pointing out just very quickly that this is just really a starting point. And just because we have goals around these 3 areas of diversity doesn't mean that we don't care about any of the others. So within the tool as well, there's also points in here around LGBT. We've also got, we're also asking firms to report back on are they disability confident? Do they have any aspirations to do that in the next 12 months? How many organisations are planning to take action? So we really want to shine a light on what organisations are doing, not just around things that are positive, but also actually where are the gaps. And what we aim to do through the data is to really understand what are the strategic programmes that we really need to invest in to ensure that every DP member within 5 years hits those goals. So it's been a really interesting journey. There's been, as you would expect, a lot of firms hesitant around providing data, a lot of concerns around data privacy. So we've been working through all those over the last sort of few months. But I really hope that you can make the event either virtually or face-to-face on the 28th, where we will share the data with you. So worth pointing out, and this is one thing I've been saying in every presentation that I've been giving around this tool, is that it's not there to name and shame firms. It's not there to sort of spotlight any one firm over another, because the reporting is all aggregate. So if your firm is not a member of the Diversity Project, please become a member of the Diversity Project, shameless plug, and actually ask the question within your organisation, is your firm participating in the Diversity Project Goals and Progress tool? Is it doing its part to try and change the game in this regard? So these are kind of the steps that we've been working through this year, and I'm moving towards the end of this sort of small section now. But it's been amazing to see, and looking at the data which we're analysing at the moment, we're kind of into this sort of 4th phase now of putting together and actually working out what is the data telling us and what are the insights. And again, really looking forward to this, to sharing this with the industry sort of later on this year. Now, a lot of people say to me, what can I do? What can I do? And I know that with diversity and inclusion, we're often pushing on an open door. People want to help. Diversity and inclusion initiatives as well also get a lot of passion within organisations, but we all know that we're only as good as the time we have on the side of our desk. Whilst the markets are in turmoil, everyone's super stressed. So what I would say is that these 3 questions are really good questions to ask within your organisation. So how are you as employers creating safe spaces for Black, queer people? Are you doing that regularly? Is there organisations like Interinvest, LGBT Great that you can leverage to help you do that? Secondly, how is your organisation providing options for your colleagues or employees to actually disclose their LGBT plus and race and ethnicity data? And how is your organisation connecting with the request for the numbers with the why is that important? And I give you all a tip, sending out an email to sort of ask for the data essentially doesn't really get very far. So it's how we connect that with a human message, with empathy, with humility, that really sees more results happening. And then the third point, again, I highlight this a second, is just around asking your organisation if it is completing the DP Goals and Progress tool. If it's not, and then maybe worth sharing a copy of the results from the survey that we get, because I do think it's going to be really, really influential in helping organisations to understand how they compare with the industry and the peers, but also what is it that they can do to try and move things forward as well. So with anything that we do, accountability, transparency, visibility, all these sorts of things are really important. Shining a light is one way in which we can encourage more good practice across the industry. And of course, if we're going to communicate about diversity, equity, inclusion issues with our clients, it's critically important that we can get these things right at home, right here, right now, within our industry. So there's quite a lot coming up in the programme over the next sort of few months. So you can see here, Talk About Black are running a really great event. We've got the Diversity Project's annual event. I did get the 28th of November right, so top marks for me. Please do sign up. Again, there's lots of resources and tools that you'll get from attending these, not just during the event, but after as well. And if you can't attend or you're unsure if you're able to attend, sign up anyway. Then at least you'll get a recording on all of the great tools sort of after as well. But I guess just a message to sort of leave you on is that, you know, transparency, visibility, accountability, and having the data needed to give us a picture of where we are now is the secret to success in terms of navigating diversity, equity, and inclusion within any organisation. So thank you, and I look forward to all sort of seeing you for a drink outside shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I've got to get my notes out now. I didn't leave them there. Ay, caramba. Okay. So, well, I hope that gave you food for thought and dessert for homework. I'd like to ask you to give a round of applause for Darren, Chris, John, Bissy, and Matt. Thank you to Schroders for hosting us. Where are Schroders? Thank you to Talk About Black for their sponsorship, and please do sign up to attend their Black History Month event on the 31st of October, and now their, what was the other date, Matt? 28th of November. And thank you to all our guests for coming out on a Monday evening. I know it's hard, but I always think Monday night's the best night anyway. We encourage you to sign up to Interinvest for future events, and we'd love to see you there. And I think everyone needs a little drink now. Take your glasses with you. Thank you very much.